I am the curator of the exhibition Pooch, The Artful Life of Keith Julius Puccinelli, which opened on September 7th, 2024 at the Art, Design, and Architecture Museum at UC Santa Barbara.
Okay, well, let's take a tour.
Okay, welcome. So this is kind of the front room that you walk into is kind of an introduction to Keith Puccinelli. And it has some of his large drawings, it has some of his very early work, and it kind of introduces the exhibition to tell you that we've broken this body of work up into different themes that Keith was interested. And one of them was portraiture, and specifically self-portraiture. And we start with one of his very earliest drawings, which is over here. So this is from 1969. It's a self-portrait that he did probably as part of a drawing class.
Well, what year was he born in?
He was born in 50.
Okay.
And so this was one of his early drawings that we decided to include. He was also had a nickname as the Cheshire Cat. So this is a drawing that he ended up and did in 1974. So there's lots of cats in his work. He loved cats. This is one of his early pieces from 1971, a sculpture that he entered into the Santa Clara County Fair, and he won 4th place. So we have the ribbon and his little book. So he's always been making artwork.
Is that Keith back in the day?
Yeah, that's Keith back in the day. Part of the reason why he was called the Cheshire Cat was that crazy hair and grin. And so he really explored throughout his career, he really explored the idea of portraiture and the idea of self. And so here are some different examples of the way that Keith drew.
Well, what's the medium? Is it ink?
This is pen and ink. This probably has some pencil in it. But he loved pen and ink, and he worked with a particular type of Japanese disposable Macron pen that came in different, very, very fine tips. I consider these as self-portraits as well. This one's called The Artist. And it's kind of, a figure with a brown bag over their head, trying to become an artist, working in a lot of different medium. It's a self-portrait. And then this one I love because it's, this one's untitled, but it kind of, he depicts himself having the conversation that you have in yourself as an artist, always kind of questioning yourself, wondering if it means anything, those kinds of things. So, yeah.
Continue.
Yeah, and then I also wanted to point out, this is a portrait of Keith very early on. By his friend Neil Izumi. This was done probably around 1972 when he was up in the Bay Area. And I just love this portrait because this, to me, this is one of the bookends of the show. So this is like the beginning where he's an artist, he's fully clothed, he's under the spotlight. He hasn't quite evolved yet. And then there's another portrait at the end of the show that will kind of mirror that. These are some really early pastels that he did. This was when he was working in a restaurant as a waiter at a fish restaurant. This was in 1980, and 1983 is when he founded Puccinelli Design and became a graphic designer full-time.
What was his first job for the restaurant?
He was a waiter, and then he became a manager. But he had all kinds of jobs. He had, worked when he first moved from San Jose to Santa Barbara after he finished studying at San Jose State University. He got a job working at a silkscreen shop and learned everything about production of silkscreen and printing and so forth. And I think those really early skills really helped him as a graphic designer later on when he started Puccinelli Studio. So we will come into here. So the exhibition is broken up into themes, and this room represents community. And I wanted this to after you meet Keith in the first room, you come into this second room and you meet Keith's audience. Keith made work for his friends and his community, and he collected artwork, and he collected artwork of his friends. So when the university received the gift from the Puccinelli estate of about 700 works of art and graphic design material and his whole archive, it included works from he and his wife Fran Puccinelli's collection, art collection.
Is this him and his wife here?
Yes. And Fran was, they met in 1983, the year he opened his Puccinelli Design Studio. And they were incredible partners. They're one of those couples that just has a positive impact and ripples throughout the community. And Fran was a very, very successful entrepreneur. She had 4 businesses in Carpinteria and really was kind of a pillar of that community in terms of the business district and helping improve Carpinteria at that time.
She really was.
Yeah, she was amazing. And so Keith was part of that as well. And they were really a team. They were just really remarkable. So she was, while she'd never call herself an artist, she was a crafter. And she did her own textiles. We have one of her rugs that she made.
Oh,
yeah. So the two of them were really very involved in their community and very involved in the art scene. And so this room represents a lot of artists that they collected and were friends with. And it's a small portion. I mean, their collections were vast of folk art, contemporary art, Santa Barbara artists, other artists that Keith was inspired by. So let's see. So that's the community room. And then this room has the big chapter heading of the everyday. Keith pulled ideas from watching TV, from talking with his friends, from looking outside, from going a walk on his avocado ranch and finding, bones or seeing animals, watching politics on TV. He just kind of was a sponge, and he pulled up information from everywhere. And then he kind of processed it and put it through himself, his own Puccinelli filter. So one of the big things that happened in Keith's life, so that's kind of the chapter of the everyday, and then it's divided into different themes. So this is the smoking section. So this section of artwork all deals with Keith and smoking. And he was a smoker, probably started in college. This is a drawing he did, I believe he was on a trip in Hawaii. And it's 4 sheets of paper. It's called Once a Smoker. The idea, once a smoker, always a smoker, even when you quit. And he had quit probably in the 80s, late 80s. And then in 1997-98, he was having issues and was diagnosed with tongue cancer. And he had to go through a very, very severe treatment of radiation. At that time, it was experimental, and having this type of cancer was kind of a death sentence. So he went through the treatment. It was successful. He survived another 19 years after the treatment, but it really damaged his throat. The radiation, it irradiated his salivary glands, so he couldn't swallow or produce spit. So because of that and the trauma that inflicted on his body, smoking was always kind of a theme for him. He made this matchstick door for sites.
Oh, those are matchsticks. Huh?
Yeah. So this is inspired. He and his wife Fran collected folk art, and some of it was like 1930s, 40s prison art, where it was a thing in America where the prisoners would make artwork out of matches, gum wrappers, cigarette filters, all kinds of things. And so the matches are burned right to just the tip of the head. It's like, just burn all the sulfur off of it, or the minerals, and then stop. And so he burned all of these matches to get them the same height and then created the pattern of the door. Keith was very inspired by folk art. So this is actually a piece that he and Fran purchased by Marlon Garian, and it's all made out of the filter ends of the cigarettes. And it's a little house. We don't really have much information on it. There are some things that when the museum received the estate, there was just information or files that we didn't have. So I'm really hoping that students will pick up this work and continue the research. These little matchbook drawings, so there's drawings on both sides of the matchbook. This again goes with the door, is part of a site-specific installation Keith did called Lucky As Again, where he created, it was a whole experience. It was almost like a theatrical experience that he created in his studio on his property, where people would get an invitation in the mail, they would agree to meet at a specific time, a car would pick them up, they'd listen to music or an audio tape, end up at his studio, and go through this whole experience of all these different rooms where he made everything and kind of took you on this journey that explored his illness. So a lot of these objects kind of relate to that work that are in the smoking section. And this is him as a young man out of college. Yeah, these are the sketchbooks. I really see the sketchbooks as the spine of the show. There are 80 sketchbooks. We technically have all of them on display, but probably 65 are actually opened. And with the sketchbooks, it's all about idea generation for him. There's very few like final renderings of things, but these are where he would work out his ideas. And if he didn't have a sketchbook with him, he always carried little bits of paper in his pocket.
Really?
So he could make notes or write a quote down or do a little doodle or write an artist's name down that he wanted to look up again. But it's really great that we have all these sketchbooks, because a lot of times the sketchbooks kind of disappear after an artist passes. So to be able to for the museum to be able to have all of them is a real treat. So again, with Keith's physical ailments that the residual from his cancer treatment, so he was always thirsty. So because of his salivary glands, and he needed to have water to be able to swallow, to eat, and so forth. He always had a water bottle with him, and this was his favorite style water bottle, so he made a plaster cast of it out of plaster of Paris, and so that's one of his sculptures.
Oh, wow.
This drawing here is called Morphine, and this was when he was going through the radiation treatment, they were giving him a lot of morphine, and there's actually quite a few sketchbooks that where he was drawing the whole time while he was undergoing treatment. And if you think about it, someone it's kind of remarkable. Someone who's going under such extreme treatment is able to sit up in bed and draw for hours at a time. It's like he could barely, get up and walk and, just kind of get through the day. So to be able to make all of this incredible artwork that then would lead to these works at a later date is really amazing. So these deal with thirst. So these are all the idea of, not being able to get what you want. I think of the Greek myth of Tantalus, who's submerged in the water, and every time he goes to take a sip, the water recedes, and every time he goes to reach for an apple, the tree recedes, and so he's in this constant state of hunger and thirst. So this jumps to kind of his everyday, what things he loved, and Keith loved cars. This is a drawing of his father's Buick from when he was growing up. And this is called Hot Rod Ambush. And then we also have a great video that he did, that Hugh Marjoram did, of a day that he and Keith spent together driving up to Taft. They just wanted to have an adventure, and so Hugh made a really great little video of that where you hear Keith and he talking about their trip, but also they interview and talk to some people who live in Taft and find out about the community. And
Do you know the name? Is there a name for it? Can one find it online?
No, it's not online. It's only available to view here at the museum. This is a Philip Guston. This is a work that the museum had. This was not in Keith and Fran's collection, but the reason I wanted to include a Philip Guston is because Guston was a huge influence on Keith. Keith saw the big show that was up in San Francisco, I believe, in like 1980. And Keith just loved the fact that, Guston went from this, figurative painter to an abstract painter, and then reinvented himself as kind of an artist who uses this caricature to really convey really profound emotions and meaning. And so you can see kind of the influence with the large eyes. Guston also had a lot of his characters smoking, so there's the smoking connection as well. And so there's a lot of work that deals with the damaged body. Keith is a pacifist. He's very anti-war, does not understand war, and he was watching the news of all these veterans coming home from the war that had been wounded, had lost a limb and so forth, and they were kind of the attractive war victims. They were also the ones that the story wouldn't talk about the devastation of war, but the new technology that the military's come up with, new prosthetics. And so it was always just kind of talking about, oh, look, you may have gone to war and lost all your limbs, but look what we can do for you, and especially with these where you've got the prosthetics.
So a number of his large pieces on various sheets of paper.
Yes.
What's the reason for that?
So when he was, again, ill and recovering from his treatment, which, you have the immediate, you're going through the treatment, and then you have recovery, and it probably took him a year or two to really fully recover. He was drawing in bed every day. He just got one of those artist boards and put a piece of paper it's about 18 by 24, 19 by 24 piece of paper, and he could draw one drawing at a time. And he did an exhibition of these single sheet drawings. And then a friend of his said, his friend Dane Goodman said, you should really make those larger. And Keith was like, I'm not gonna make them larger. I can't make them larger. I draw in bed, And then he realized he could start tiling them together. So he would draw one piece. He'd make a little sketch. So he'd have a little sketch to refer to. Then he would draw this panel, and then he'd start on the next panel and the next panel, and then put them all together. And then maybe do a little touch up, but pretty much was just drawing it panel by panel. So there's several large drawings that are done with multiple sheets of paper.
So the clown is one of his themes.
Yeah, the clown is definitely one of his themes because of his name. Puccinelli is like Pulcinella, the character from the Commedia dell'arte, which then morphed into Puccinello and then morphed into Punch and Judy. And so he kind of took that on as a persona. Yeah. Actually, if we...
Is this an example of a sketch to be before you...
Yeah. So this would be a little sketch, and then this would be the large drawing, which is made up of 6 sheets of paper. Yeah, so Keith, because of his name, was inspired by this clown and decided to kind of take on this clown persona in his artwork, because the clown is an interesting figure that can, you know, speak truth to power, kind of has an interesting role in society as comedic, but also can talk about very serious things. So this is a video that was actually part of the larger Lucky Is Again installation. It was originally shown in a medicine cabinet. So when you open the medicine cabinet, it would trigger the video. But I found a copy of this in the archive and found out that it was made with his college friend, Neil Izumi. And Keith had told Neil, like, I want to make this video of me in a clown costume just vamping in front of it. And so they went and they rented a hotel room for a couple hours and filmed the whole thing in one shot. And this is Keith as a clown.
And next to it are what?
These are the clown noses. I decided Keith loved like people being able to have a takeaway. So in thinking of Keith and the show, I thought it would be nice if everyone could take a clown nose with them.
Excellent.
Yeah.
I took one when I was
Oh,
here
good.
earlier.
I'm so glad. Yeah. So these are some of the clown drawings he did while he was, post-treatment and still recovering. And you've got, this one's called Lightheaded. This one is The Reporter. This one's The Argument. This one's called Two-Faced. And this one's called Ignis Fatuus.
He named most of his pieces.
Yes and no. There are a lot that are untitled. So with this, these had titles, but other works that were gifted to the museum, a lot of them may not have been shown, or he didn't sign and date them because they were just, he was just making them. He hadn't intended on showing them. So there's some real treasures in here because of that, As I say in the intro, it's like they're the things that were stuffed in the flat files and under the bed. So we've pulled those out. So he was really inspired by his landscape. He and Fran owned a geodesic dome on 8 acres of an avocado ranch out in Ventura. And so there was tons of wildlife. So he was really inspired by the wildlife. And the thing I like about this suite of 3 drawings is you can see, like, this is pretty refined. This is more abstracted. It's like his ability and style. He could draw any way he wanted. He was really a master. So he could do like a rough little sketch, or if he did something in felt pen, or however he wanted.
What is this called?
This one it's a jackrabbit, but it's the Burning Animals series, and this one's called Jackrabbit.
Hair on fire.
Yeah, it should be. So he was interested in this idea of fire. I think there were wildfires that were happening when he was working on these, but he was also just interested, like, well, what if everything was what if all animals were on fire? So he had a sturgeon on fire. He had sparrows on fire, and crows on fire. He drew all different kind of animals on fire, and the squirrel. This is a series, he was looking at the McDonald's arch. So you can see the arch. And I think this may have been around the time that woman was scalded by the McDonald's coffee. But then you've got the arches here. You've got this kind of cannibalism, this cycle, life cycle that going on. Kind of the religious nature of McDonald's and capitalism. And then I'm not sure. So this is a little series I found in the flat files. These are really early photographs that he took probably while he was in college. And again, it just kind of shows his interest in kind of the everyday. And this, you can see him photographing in the shadows, trying to figure out the camera and the composition.
Political work.
These are the presidents, so that's Bill Clinton.
Let's see, which is Clinton?
This one.
Oh, this is Clinton.
Oh, I love that because he's like standing on the flag and trying to raise it.
And who are these three?
This is Al Gore, and he titled this one Fuzzy Al. And this is Obama, and then that's Reagan, and he titled that one, where is it? Ronaldus Magnus. Keith was anti-gun violence, and he did a lot of series with guns. He had this idea that if he did a lot of he wanted to make all these guns because it was always such an issue. So what if he started making guns in all kinds of crazy material? And if he made hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and millions of them, then maybe they could change that they could have an influence and render the issue mute. So that guns always weren't a symbol of violence, but they could be a symbol of something else. So it was this crazy idea he had, but it prompted him to make all these guns out of paper bags and staples and socks and sweater cuffs and beads and buttons. And so we're entering into a room that I'm calling the curtains room. And this deals with Keith's interest and his main subject matter, which always is dealing with death. But as he will also point out, in looking at death, you're also looking at life. And so we're mortal, and mortality is something that he questioned a lot, especially after his experience with cancer. So he's been thinking about the idea of the self and the meaning of life and all of these things. And he just kind of one day realized, we're just another dead motherfucker. And so he decided to draw a portrait of a clown. And when Keith talks about artists who do portraits, you almost always find a sense of the artist. You find some kind of, the artist is also in that portrait, even if it's a portrait of somebody else. So this is a clown laid out for a wake.
Did he make these shoes?
I think he altered them. Yeah.
Cool.
So this one's Yet Another Dead Motherfucker, is what it's called. And so when he was drawing these, this one especially, you kind of see the shortening of the legs. You have one shoe that's really big, this one's really small. A lot of his distortion, some of it's intentional, some of it's by accident, but I think what he liked about it was it shows more of the vulnerability of the characters. None of us has a perfectly asymmetrical body. Hopefully by the end of our life, we've been through so much, our bodies are really worn out because we've lived a really great life. So I think that comes through in the work. And this piece here is called Ascension, with the shoes rising. But you can see he's got all these little thorns. It's like rose thorns, almost bloody rose thorns, as he's rising up.
Here's a nude he did.
Yeah. So this photograph was done by Donna Granada, and it was for the Focused on the Masters interview that she did with him. And
is that in his dome house?
Yes. So this was taken in his dome house, and when Donna told Keith that she was going to do his self-portrait for this, he goes, I know exactly what I want to do. And so And what I like about this is kind of the bookend to the other photograph at the beginning of the show, is that, again, he's under this light, but this time he's fully exposed, like he's fully realized who he is as an artist and a human being, and it's like, here I am to the world.
Nice. His notebooks.
And I'll point out in this case, these are actually the last two drawings that Keith made. So this was a few days before he passed. He was in the hospital. And then what caused him to go into the hospital was actually he had passed out on a plane. And so when the paramedics met him and so forth at the airport, took him to the hospital. And so he did this drawing while he was in the hospital. He didn't have his sketchbooks or his little pads of paper, so he asked the doctor, do you have paper I can draw on? And then the next day, or that following Monday when he was back home, he made this drawing, and then he passed away that night.
I know he and his wife passed away at close to the same time. Did he?
About 9 months apart.
Who died first?
Fran passed away December 8th or 9th, 2016, and then he passed away September 18th, 2017. So these pictures on the wall, these two here are sketches for the larger drawings.
Any idea how long it take him to do something like this?
It could take a month, it could take several months. It depended on how much time he had to work every day. But if you think about these are all just little teeny hash marks. They're all just little teeny lines. It's all cross-hatching. And so you just think about the millions of marks that are used to make each drawing. This is a drawing that he actually titled Curtains. So it looked like curtains to him. In reality, it was just bolognese. Nothing but a big bowl of spaghetti and bolognese couldn't cure. So these are two early works that Keith did. These are part of his Exotic Space Monster series. And he was always kind of fascinated with the mouth. And he was also very influenced by this book, which is the illustrated Beatles lyrics. And it was a book that was, I think, came out in 68 or 69. And it was done by Alan Aldridge, where he did a huge call from illustrators, photographers, artists from around the world. And then they did a selection. And this book was really influential on Keith. And so you can kind of best see the connection through these two works. So in 1983, Keith couldn't find work as a graphic designer. He had decided he was kind of done waiting tables and wanted to become a graphic designer. And he couldn't find any work in Santa Barbara. He went to all the design houses and so forth and couldn't find any work. So he's like, well, I better start my own business. So he decided to start Puccinelli Design, and this was a logo he kind of came up with later, but the idea of Pucc. And it's actually part of a larger logo where there's an NLE, which we'll see in a second. So this gallery is really focused to Puccinelli Design Studio. And the studio was from 1983 to about 1996 when he really closed up the business. And so this wall shows his Puccinelli design with the dog and the N and the LE, and one of his promotional posters. He did a lot of self-promotion and did his own promotional posters, because that's where you could really express yourself as a designer without any limitations. And he loved the format of the poster, and he loved doing logos. So on the back of this self-promotion piece are many of the clients that he did logos for. And a lot of the copy and the graphic design work Keith wrote, and he's very witty, and he's really a wordsmith, and he tells a great story. So there's a lot of humor in his work.
Yeah. And here it spells out Puccinelli.
Yeah. But then because of the Italian connection, you got like the Italy boot as a dog. And then there's also in the advertising world, if you put a dog on anything, more people are going to look at it. It's like we're just drawn to dogs. So it's also tongue-in-cheek as well. So these were self-promotions for Puccinelli Design. He won all kinds of awards for his design work. And you can also see there's a lot of connection between how he thinks about design and how he makes his fine art as well. And then, yeah. So he and his wife Fran and a group of other people were responsible for helping create the Avocado Festival in Carpinteria, which is, I don't know how many years it's been going, but over 30, I think now. Keith was very involved with a lot of nonprofits in his community and designed a lot of posters and did a lot of graphic design for nonprofits. So the Heart and Soul poster, this was the very first AIDS walk in Santa Barbara. So he did that, and it's a beautiful silk screened. They're all editioned and signed. He loved the poster, as I said before. He did the solstice. And then he was very involved with the Contemporary Arts Forum. That's actually how I met Keith. And he did the black and orange bash Halloween. They did a big Halloween event fundraiser. And so he did the posters for that. And what I love about these is that it's very humble materials. It's just newsprint. And then he also did a promotional piece where the ceiling had caved in at CAF, and we did a little fundraiser to raise funds to fix the building. And it's just Xerox. And the thing is like, if you have good design, you can work with whatever the humblest of materials and still make something really compelling that will impact people.
Who is this?
This pastel is called Upper Management. And I have this here because this is when Keith was working for the Enterprise Fish Company. And so this was one of his managers. And so he did this pastel drawing. But also the Enterprise Fish Company ended up becoming a client of Keith's when he decided to open Puccinelli Design Studio. And so he developed their logo and their identity system. Over here he did design work for his wife Fran and her businesses, and she had the Francis Puccinelli Gallery. And she, at that time, was collecting so much folk art, and it was a folk art kind of focused gallery as well as showing some Santa Barbara artists. But she did a partnership with the Santa Barbara Museum of Natural History where they created Dia de los Muertos event and an altar. And from what I understand, it's one of the first times that there had been an altar like this at the museum. So she was really important in terms of bringing those kinds of festivities and activities to the community. So Keith did a series of postcards and posters that were on recycling and reuse. And this is at a time when all of these recycled papers were starting to hit the market.
And this is on recycled paper?
Yeah. And using the different kind of inks. And so there's a time period where it's like everything does get a little darker in design because people are starting to experiment with these other types of papers and how they receive ink and how you can work with them. This has been a great visit to see the exhibition about Keith Puccinelli at the Art, Design, and Architecture Museum at UC Santa Barbara. And this is really a show that is introducing Keith's work to a lot of people who may have never known Keith, and also kind of a reunion for a lot of people who knew Keith. And Keith is a really interesting artist in that he wanted to be an artist. He didn't want to be a painter or a sculptor or a filmmaker. He wanted to be an artist in a much larger sense. So that's why there's a huge variety of material in the exhibition. You see his sketchbooks, his graphic design work, his drawings, his sculpture, his video, all kinds of things in the show. And hopefully it's laying a foundation for future scholarship and for students to work with this material ongoing into, hopefully forever, as long as it exists here.
Well, certainly inspiring, and thanks so much for the visit today.
Thank you.